we're diving into the invisible infrastructure of the modern world. I mean, think about the smartphone you use, the electric vehicle being charged outside, or those immense offshore wind farms. They're all powered by materials you've probably never touched, or maybe even heard of, rare earth metals, or REMs. And the core paradox we're unpacking today is, well, it's staggering. These elements are the foundation of the technology we need to build a green future, yet the process of getting them out of the ground, it risks destroying the very environment we're trying to save. In fact, these elements are now considered, in some circles, more valuable than oil or gold because they're the absolute catalyst for future technological development.
And right out of the gate, we really have to deal with that name, rare earth metals. It's so misleading, it implies they're scarce, which, geologically speaking, just isn't accurate. They're often quite abundant in the Earth's crust.
Okay, so if they aren't actually rare, why do we call them that? Is it just branding?
It's purely a chemical designation. These 17 elements, they're so remarkably similar chemically that they never appear alone. They're always mixed together in these complex ores. So to get the one pure element you actually need, say, for a magnet, it is, and this is a quote, very difficult to chemically isolate it from the rest of the group. You need these very sophisticated, very resource-intensive processes.
So the rare part is about the difficulty of processing, not the amount in the ground.
Exactly. That's the real source of the label.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to understand what makes these strange elements so vital, how one country, China, came to dominate, roughly 97% of the global supply chain,
Yeah.
and what the world is now scrambling to do to find sustainable and, secure alternatives. When you look at the history of these elements, it's fascinating. They spent decades just being almost completely ignored by scientists.
Yep.
They were considered, and I love this phrase, simply too weird because their chemical properties were so challenging to work with.
That's right. Before the digital age, their applications were extremely limited. I mean, we used cerium in things like lighter flints, and then lanthanum found a role in the mid-20th century, of all places, in making gasoline production something like 10 to 30% cheaper. But the real game changer was high-efficiency electronics.
Right, and electric power. So why are they suddenly indispensable now? Why can't we just use a traditional iron magnet in, say, an electric vehicle motor or a wind turbine?
Because conventional materials are just too bulky, too inefficient for what we demand today. Rare earths allow for miniaturization and just a vast improvement in power density. You look at something like neodymium. It creates the strongest permanent magnets available, which is absolutely essential for EV motors and wind turbines. It lets them be lighter and smaller, but still deliver massive power.
And I understand that when those magnets get hot, like in a high-performance EV on the highway, they start to lose their magnetism unless you add another specific ingredient.
Precisely. That's where dysprosium comes in. It's used with neodymium to make those magnets heat-resistant. This is a crucial feature, especially in those big offshore wind turbines that operate under a heavy load where temperatures can really soar. Without dysprosium, your Tesla wouldn't be able to maintain its peak performance for very long.
It's the enabling technology for efficiency.
It is. We also rely on lanthanum to dramatically improve the performance of EV batteries, which reduces the need for constant recharging. And the screen you're looking at right now, whether it's a computer or a smartphone, it owes its vivid, crisp colors to elements like yttrium. They're everywhere, making things smaller, faster, and more efficient.
And this is where the paradox really hits home, and it explains that high price tag. These elements are non-renewable, yet they are the critical foundation for renewable energy. And the scale of demand is it's staggering. We found data showing that a single 5-megawatt wind turbine requires about 1 ton of rare earth metals.
1 ton.
1 ton. That's roughly 800 kilograms of neodymium and 200 kilograms of dysprosium just for its magnet system. That is a massive material commitment for a supposedly clean future.
To understand the strategic risk we're facing now, you really have to look at the huge supply shift that happened over the last 50 years. The U.S. was initially the major player. The Mountain Pass mine in California, it basically dominated world production from the mid-60s to the mid-90s.
But during that time, China was quietly executing this long-term plan? How did they go from being a minor player to controlling nearly the entire market?
It was a decades-long strategic move, and it was heavily subsidized by their government. They began serious exploration way back in the 1950s. Their key advantage was the Baotou mine, which started as an iron ore operation. And they discovered that the rare earth ore was sitting right there, often as a waste product, just sitting on top of the iron ore. They realized they could process this waste and turn it into a massive economic asset.
So they literally turned a mining byproduct into a market advantage.
Exactly. And then they deployed the economic hammer price.
Mhm.
China was able to produce and process these materials with incredibly low labor costs and, crucially, by using methods that were often, let's say, dirty and outdated. This meant they had almost no environmental regulations to slow them down or add expense. They just flooded the market with what were essentially dumping prices.
That sounds like a textbook case of undercutting the competition. It must have made production anywhere else completely unsustainable.
It did. Mines outside of China, like Mountain Pass, they just couldn't compete economically, not against those prices. That, combined with some very serious environmental issues at the U.S. site, drove the Mountain Pass mine to close in 2002. And that single event just solidified China's position. They didn't just dominate mining, they gained control over refining and separation too, securing, an estimated 97% of the global supply.
That level of dependence created an extraordinary strategic vulnerability, which the world discovered the hard way in 2011. What exactly triggered that market shock?
By 2011, China's own domestic demand for rare earths, or for their own electronic sectors, had grown immensely. At the same time, they claimed they were tightening environmental regulations. But the effect was clear. The government severely restricted exports. It was, without a doubt, a geopolitical move to flex their market power.
And for manufacturers, the impact must have been immediate and chaotic.
Oh, it was devastating. We saw prices just instantly soar. Think about something as simple as an energy-saving light bulb. Its price jumped by 25%. We have this account from Max Berman, a magnet manufacturer who saw prices for neodymium oxide just explode. He said they tripled, even quadrupled, within a few months. It forced his company to shut down production lines and cancel entire projects.
That volatility immediately redefined rare earths, didn't it? It shifted them from being a commercial commodity to an absolutely strategic resource.
Absolutely. It became essential for national defense, for economic growth, for the green transition, and the geopolitical fallout was significant. The U.S., Europe, and Japan, they all formally filed complaints with the World Trade Organization. That action confirmed this was not just a commercial spat. It was a global, strategic vulnerability.
The price volatility and the supply chain risk, that's one major problem. But the true hidden cost of rare earths is the deep damage to the environment during extraction.
We established that separation is the hard part, right? Because the elements are so chemically similar. How does that translate into environmental destruction?
It translates into brute force chemistry. Since the elements never occur alone, separating them requires huge amounts of energy, and critically, the use of what the source material calls highly aggressive corrosive chemicals. We're talking about massive volumes of sulfuric, nitric, and hydrochloric acids just to dissolve the rock and pull the elements apart.
That sounds like an inherently polluting process no matter where it happens. It is. And the effluent, the wastewater from this process, carries a highly toxic and radioactive risk. See, the rare earths are frequently bound to natural radioactive contaminants, primarily thorium. So when those corrosive acids dissolve the rare earths, they also dissolve the thorium. And if that wastewater isn't handled with extreme care, and historically it often hasn't been, those radioactive elements leak right into the soil and groundwater.
And we don't have to look overseas to find evidence of this. The example from the old U.S. leader, Mountain Pass, illustrates this perfectly.
It's the very reason the U.S. mine closed in the first place. It shows this is a universal problem not confined to one region. In 1998, they had a catastrophic failure where, get this, 1 billion liters of radioactive and chemically contaminated wastewater leaked out of a collecting pond.
1 billion liters, that volume it's almost impossible to comprehend.
Yes, and it polluted a nearby nature reserve. That disaster, under the weight of stricter environmental rules and the low price of Chinese imports, is what finally forced the mine to shut down in 2002.
That single data point, 1 billion liters of toxic radioactive water, it just encapsulates the heart of the green paradox we face today. We rely on these materials to build the infrastructure for a better standard of living, including all the clean tech we need. But the historical method of sourcing them risks causing this profound, irreversible damage. We have to figure out how to transition without destroying the planet in the process.
So given the strategic vulnerability and, of course, the environmental cost, the global response has been to aggressively pursue 3 simultaneous paths.
Okay, let's start with the physical search. Diversification, finding new sources. We're even looking at the bottom of the ocean, right?
That's path 1, new sources. Scientists are exploring deep-sea mining, looking at Pacific manganese nodules, these rock-like deposits rich not just in rare earths, but also nickel, cobalt, zinc. The argument is that this bypasses land use issues.
But this introduces a massive new environmental controversy.
It certainly does. Deep-sea ecosystems are incredibly sensitive. Life forms down there grow and regenerate, and I'm quoting here, very, very slowly. Mining activities risk causing permanent damage to a part of the global environment we barely even understand. It's a huge trade-off that nations are debating intensely right now.
And back on land, the U.S. is trying to recover some of its former dominance. The Mountain Pass mine has reopened. Are they able to address the environmental legacy that shut them down?
That's the entire objective.
Yeah.
They're promising cleaner processes. Specifically, they're redesigning the chemistry to keep contaminants like thorium insoluble, which prevents them from leaking into the water. They're targeting about 15 to 20% of the global market share. We also see activity in Europe, like a potential massive deposit found in Saxony, Germany. But because that area is so densely populated, the only viable option is complex and incredibly expensive underground mining to keep the surface impact minimal.
Okay, so the second strategy is the circular economy, reusing what we already have. This is the whole idea of urban mining, right? Treating our old electronics phones, computers, as a future raw material warehouse.
It's a beautiful concept, but the economics have always been the hurdle. The rare earth content in a single smartphone is minuscule, and it's dispersed across hundreds of tiny components. Current recycling methods are mostly focused on recovering high-volume metals like copper and gold because that's where the money is.
So if the cost of digging it up new is low, recycling just doesn't pay for itself.
Exactly. Recycling is only profitable when the recovery cost is lower than sourcing primary materials. Until that equation changes for consumer electronics, they mostly end up in landfills. However, the picture is much brighter for industrial waste. A chemist named Wolfram Pallich, for instance, is making huge strides recovering high-concentration rare earths directly from the waste generated during magnet manufacturing. That's a much more profitable target.
And the third, and you could argue the most disruptive solution, is innovation, just redesigning products to remove the need for these materials entirely. This is where it gets really interesting.
It fundamentally changes the demand curves, and the leading example here is Tesla. They successfully developed and produced EV motors that do not use any rare earths. This is a huge achievement. It shows that a zero-rem future in certain high-demand applications is absolutely viable and is putting tremendous pressure on every other major manufacturer to follow suit.
And for the elements we still need, there's the material substitution angle, finding cheaper, more abundant swaps.
That work is ongoing. At places like Ames Laboratory, scientists like Bill McCallum are focused on our reliance on expensive elements, like dysprosium. Their goal is to create new magnetic compounds, using the far more abundant cerium instead. This whole effort is a clear sign of how industry adapts when cost and strategic risk reach a breaking point. It forces us to innovate our way out of dependence. #outro. So the path to future resilience, both technologically and environmentally, it has to be an integrated strategy. We have to succeed across all three fronts, diversifying with new, cleaner sources, implementing scalable industrial recycling, and driving radical innovation to reduce demand entirely. The challenge is immense, but we have to balance technology's massive growing needs with our fundamental environmental responsibility.
We've established today that the future can't be clean if the sourcing of its materials is dirty. Global consumption of rare earths has doubled in just the last 20 years, and it continues to climb, which means a business-as-usual approach is simply not sustainable. The global community is facing a defining moment. This idea is perhaps best summed up by an analogy that guides researchers. Just like we need a more sustainable approach for producing our food, we need one for sourcing our raw materials. The next time you pick up a device or look at a wind turbine, just consider the hidden costs and the global race for independence that powers it, and what responsibility that places on all of us.